Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening if you are with Claire back in the UK watching the book launch for her new thriller, Hostage, a true nail biter. I was just saying to Claire, I barely made it to this event because I was so busy in my library rereading the book. At 10 minutes to one, I suddenly realized I hadn't even opened my computer, no lipstick. I mean, it was going to be a disaster. But fortunately, it has worked out, and I'm really pleased to see Clare Mackintosh. And my dear, since it's only 1 o'clock here, I'm going to drink your toast and a cup of tea rather than, there you go. Our
I know,
events are all BYOB.
as always, when I do an event with you, I feel the need to point out to everyone in America that it is actually 9 p.m. here, and I'm not a lush drinking in the day.
Well, I think that wine with lunch personally is a great idea, but as I have two to go after you, I thought maybe I'd stay sober until I arrive at the end of the day. In any case, Hostage really has a lovely cover. And Claire, why don't you show us the UK edition and tell us what little bit of it is different?
Well, I mean, this is a little game of spot the difference, isn't it? They are essentially the same cover. So this is the first time I've ever had a book with the same cover in the UK and the US. It originated with my UK publishers, and so the blurb is pretty much the same. What the authors have said on it. So we've got I've got Lee Child and Lisa Jewell on this one. Is that what you've got?
No, actually, we have Sherry LaPena and Lisa.
There we go. This is like it is spot the difference. And then on the back, I've got Karen Slaughter and Linwood Barkley.
And on the back, I have Lisa Gardner, Karen Slaughter, and Lee Child at the bottom. How about that?
Slightly different, and of course the finish is a bit different. So it's a bit hard to tell, but if I move it like this, you'll see that on the UK version, the title is raised, and it's a Pantone color, they call it. So it's really vivid. And they've got slightly different stickers. This is the BBC Radio 2 Book Club pick sticker. But otherwise, the design is exactly the same. And I really love it because it's got this sort of mix of, you know there's a plane, but also there's clearly quite a lot of domestic suspense, which is, the area in which I write.
Well, it is. And actually, one of the most interesting things about it, well, there are two things about it I think are unusual, particularly unusual. One is the number of voices that Claire has telling the story, different parts of the story. So you know about Mina, who is or do you call her Mina? Which one do you call her?
Mina, short for Amina.
Okay, so she is the flight attendant who suffered a terrible panic attack and never became a pilot, although more on that as you read the book. Her husband, Adam, is a police officer who is clearly in trouble for reasons that we will eventually discover. They have a small daughter, Sophia, who's adopted, who has an attachment disorder, which I think Claire explores brilliantly in this book. So all of that is really great. But the other thing that's, I think, unusual in a thriller is that there are several step backs. Most thrillers end with a bang, and that's it. But in this book, there's a bang, and then there's a delayed bang, and then there's yet another bang, and then there's one more, and then there's a final one. And so the layers that the story, the layers in which Claire tells the story are also layers in which you get to a final and really unexpected resolution. So I was rereading the final step back, and and I read it again just to make sure that I fully understood it. When I realized all of a sudden it was game time and I should be running out here. So what inspired you, Claire, to use this complicated structure?
Well, so firstly, hopefully it's not complicated to read. Hopefully it actually sort of unfolds in an exciting way. But it's multi-layered, and it's multi-layered because, and this sounds slightly simplistic, this is a book and not a movie. This is not a 90-minute movie, not a film treatment where we want, the big exciting bang and then we can stop and roll the credits and leave everyone in the cinema going, oh, what did we just watch? This is a novel where we want answers, we want a conclusion, we want to understand not just what has happened and who's done it, who the baddie is, but why they've done it and what the consequences are. And I spent 12 years in the police force, as you know, and you learn very quickly that their loose ends don't get tied up neatly. You know, it's not a film, it's not a nice neat ending. The ramifications of trauma and chaotic events, such as the ones that happen in this book, go on and on and on and on. And that is a gift for a novelist, because it is a natural incentive, I suppose, to add in more layers and more twists. So that, I suppose, was the thinking behind the approach to a book that I could have tackled in many different ways.
You could, and I love the way you did it. And complicated was an unfortunate choice of words for me. Sorry about that. I should have said complex or multi-layer. I didn't mean to imply it was difficult to follow. What I meant was that you think that you know something, and then there's another twist, and you think that now you know more, but until you get to the real end here, you don't know it all. Which I think is, you're absolutely right. There's a TV series on at the moment called The Bay. Which is British and set up in Morecambe Bay. And they've done 2 sessions in which it's very similar. There's a lot of things going on. There are different points of view. There are different viewpoint characters. And just when you think it's all over, then there's some other thing and so they're trying to, as you say, you can't tie up all the loose ends, but you can try to make sense out of a number of them and explain the motivations. But the other thing your book does, I think, with its structure is that it isn't just about what happens to the protagonist and her close circle. You're showing us the fallout from, basically, this is a potential airplane disaster book. So you're showing us the fallout that can happen to everybody, which I think is absolutely great. Now, I will say, Claire, that you have pointed out a number of people who gave you blurbs and who absolutely love this book. And happily, one of them is going to join us and give us a real live view onto.
No, who?
Yes.
What?
Well, just hold on 1 minute. There he is.
Oh my goodness.
Hello.
Oh, you've just made me cry.
Mr. Child, good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon. Just stopping by to say hi to Claire and congratulations and best of luck.
Well, that's not enough. Come on, you blurbed this book. I'm not letting you off the hook that easily. In first place, let me say how very cool your background is. Every time we talk, which is so often, you're in a different place. Where are you?
I'm in Colorado, but you don't want too much information, but my cleaner is here, and so I'm in my basement studio.
Love it. All right, so I'm so glad, Claire, that you were pleased. I thought it would be nice to have a surprise here.
That certainly is a surprise. Thank you. I thought when you told me there was going to be a surprise, or you tweeted there was a surprise, I thought you were going to be dressed up as a pilot, perhaps, or a flight attendant. It didn't occur to me, Barbara, you might have brought someone else in. Lee, it's really lovely to see you, and thank you for your amazing blurb and your support for Hostage. It's much appreciated.
Well, thank you for the book. What a ride that was. I loved it, and I think a lot of people are going to love it. I'm not sure whether I'm just supposed to drop in and say hi.
No, stick around. Tell us about the book, because one of the things I love about Lee is that he's a really thoughtful reader. He's also an amazingly prolific reader. So generally, when I do see Lee enthusiastic on a book, I know that he's read it and he has thoughts about why he wrote a blurb. And I really was hoping you'd share those with us, dear.
He does, but he also read it almost a year ago and will have read about 200 books since then. So I think putting him on the spot to ask him what he thought of chapter 27 is probably a bit unfair.
Yeah, chapter 27, I don't recall, but
it's a good one.
What actually really intrigued me about it was, going back to the roots of the genre, the various conventions and types. It's like a double locked room mystery in a way. Obviously, a plane is by definition a locked room. There's not much you can do to get out of it. And was it on your mind in terms of trying to exploit or subvert that kind of setup that is such a classic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always it's always a challenge and a bit of a kind of it's quite nerve-wracking when you tackle something that is really established and almost a trope. And what I wanted to avoid was a kind of what was a disaster movie film, a Con Air or a Snakes on the Plane, because actually what I write generally is crime with a domestic suspense element, and so to have the two locked rooms, and I can't really talk too much obviously about why there are two and what the second one is, it enables us to kind of to run two different types of jeopardy in parallel, and to play with the similarities, but also to play with the differences. Plus I've got a really short attention span, and flitting between the two means that I never get bored with one storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I did love the way that it actually bridged those two things, the super high concept, high tech thing, and also the domestic suspense. It was like both were in play throughout. So yeah, I loved it. I thought it was really terrific. And anyway, how are you
I
doing?
found the voices convincingly. Did you? I mean, each person that had a narrative moment, I thought had a different and very convincing voice. And I was saying to Claire, you don't see that many narrators often in one book.
I agree with that. It's very difficult because if you have a strong authorial voice, which Claire does, it's very difficult to step out of that for the various different characters. And that's something that I do wrong all the time, that all my characters sound like Jack Reacher. And people have noticed that, but you've got to be able to do more than one person at a time. But just in passing, don't diss Snakes on the Plane, because the head producer for Snakes on the Plane is also the head producer for the Jack Reacher TV that they're shooting right now, and he's the nicest guy. And they had a lot of fun making that movie. They didn't think they were going to win an Oscar or anything, but they had a lot of fun. And
it is a pretty awesome film. Yeah.
I know. I wish I had whatever they were smoking. And you can imagine the story conferences for that movie.
Neither of you is old enough probably to remember, but there was an airplane movie made, God, it was forever ago, called The High and the Mighty, which I think was taken from a book, if I remember this right. And it was another one where, they're flying over the Pacific and they're running, I don't remember why, fuel's running out and they pass the point of no return. So they're forced to go on to Los Angeles. And, it's really terrifying. The thing I remember the most, and I don't remember her name, she's a very blonde actress. And at the end, she was so wrung. She had no eyebrows. All of her face was makeup. And by the time you got to the end of the movie, she was so whatever, a whole bit that she'd erased her face essentially. And the camera pans in on her, and it's almost like a Halloween mask. And it's somebody like John Wayne, really laconic. And when the plane finally settles down and they can't even measure the gas in the plane, the door to the pilot's thing opens and he strolls out, like Reacher sort of, down the aisle and off the plane. And it really diffused, I thought, the terror, but maybe that's the point, because all of us really have some fear when we step into an airplane. I mean, Lee, you spent,
but I think that's why people love airplane disaster movies and airplane books. There's that mix of, it should be something nice generally if we're flying, where most of us are going to something fun, perhaps we're going on holiday, or it's a great work trip or something, but it's always tinged with that bit of danger. It's like going on a roller coaster. The reason you love it is because you feel a little bit afraid and you're not in your comfort zone. And so I think that's why we like to read books set on aeroplanes. The potential for things to go wrong is quite high. And of course, the people watching is so brilliant. And I travel mostly on my own, not in a kind of Reacher way. I mean, I do surround myself with people, but if I'm traveling for work, then, I haven't got anyone with me. And I really like that. because it gives me that opportunity to watch everyone else and work out if they're traveling on their own and why they're going, and are they looking forward to it, and what are they thinking about. And I just find it absolutely fascinating on a long haul flight to watch other people.
Yeah, having those little quiet grimacing arguments that they're hoping that nobody else is overhearing. And also in the airport, I love that. It's being on tour, if you have an hour to change planes in an airport, that's not a waste of time. I mean, it is absolutely invaluable to watch the other people. But I think it's a very fundamental point you make about the danger that you kind of know will be all right. I think that is absolutely fundamental to people loving to read thrillers. They love to be scared and in peril, as long as they know in the back of their mind it will be all right in the end. And I really learned that from my daughter when she was a kid. I would give her a bath and then pick her out of the bath when she's all wet and soapy, and then pretend to drop her and catch her at the last minute. And she just loved that, because I think it is very human to want to somehow push the boundary and feel fear when you know it's going to be all right. And I think that that's what makes thrillers so attractive, because it is all right in the end, and people rely on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it remains the most popular genre. It's growing all the time, isn't it? What do you think about the all the different kind of subcategories of crime? I feel like every day there's another, domestic suspense or psychological thrillers, or are they still crime novels?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who makes that stuff up, and I also don't know, when I'm writing a book, I've no idea really what it is I'm aiming for. I just want to tell that story, and if somebody else wants to label it, that's fine. But I agree, the ever-increasing categories, but it is not as bad as romance. I was once invited to Romantic Times award evening, and they had, whereas in crime and thrillers, you have maybe 6 or maybe 8 awards, they had about 108, because every single category was very specific. Future dystopian urban would be a prize all its own, and every shade or gradation of the genre was recognized separately, which I guess is really good for the authors, because there's a lot more prizes going, a lot more recognition.
Yeah, I do. I think it's confusing for readers, and I worry that because a lot of these categories are basically online search terms, aren't they? They're a way of funneling people through a website to find a particular product. And the more we get into that, and the more people think, oh, so that's what I read. I read urban dystopian psychological thrillers for, LGBT people, then that's their category that they're stuck in. And that's so different from walking into the Poison Pen and looking at books on the table and thinking, oh, that looks interesting, and taking it to the till just because it looks like a great book. And I worry that the more heavily we create genres, the less flexible we're being, and that will put people off.
Yeah, we're missing out on a lot. What I do as a sort of ritual, if I'm going on a trip, either a vacation or work or something, I don't go to the bookstore, I go to the supermarket and just buy the paperbacks based on what they look like and what they say, with no reference whatsoever to the author or the subject or the genre, just what looks good. And that's the way you explore other things. You get sucked into other genres that you haven't been before. But it's terrifying, because there are so many good books. It is, it's very humbling. A random selection of 6 books will probably give you 4 that are excellent. And you think, my God, I've got to fight against all these people.
I know, it is humbling, and it's exciting, because new voices and lots of talent and a never-ending supply of brilliant books. I also find it slightly, this is a bit morbid, but just slightly depressing that I know that I can't ever read all the books that I want to read, and I try really, really hard, and I read, so I read on audio as well. So that gives me extra time, time when I'm driving or gardening or cooking, whatever, I can listen to books. So suddenly I've doubled my intake. But where else do I go? I can't read any faster than I'm reading, and I'd like to. How many books do you read a year? Do you know?
Oh, easily 300. I read, one a day, unless they're very thick, in which case it might be 2 days. But yeah, I just love it. I mean, I'm a total bookworm and always was as a little kid. It was shaped my life, created my life. And I've never gotten out of the habit. And it is, it's great, but it leaves you no time to do anything else. I watched a lot of TV during the lockdown, which I hadn't done literally for decades. I watched binged whole things, and that was pretty interesting. And actually, that was a question I was going to ask, because having read Hostage, I know for a fact that this is not a disguised screenplay at all. This is a thriller novel, pure and simple. But we're all kind of in the same river. That story is a movie story or a TV story. How aware were you writing it that there could be other media that will use it? Hopefully, you get a deal, a movie is made. Were you sort of half thinking about that at all?
No, because I feel quite, I feel slightly bruised in the way that I think a lot of authors go through by the experience of my debut being sold. And I know that I'll tell you sort of what happened, because this happens to every single author who sells an option on their book. So I sold an option on I Let You Go, which was my debut, which sold lots and lots of copies around the world. And of course, the second I sold that option, that was it. I was, it was going to be a movie. It was going to be watched by everyone in the world. It was, it came out, so the book had come out the same year as Girl on the Train. So I was like, well, this is great. This is what's going to happen to mine too. I've signed the option. He's really keen. And that was 2014, 2015. And we're now 2021. And I have written, I don't know how many versions of that script. We've been through, same producer, we've been through so many different networks. We've cast it, we've uncast it, we've had directors, we've lost directors. And it's been such a roller coaster of, excitement and letdowns that I finally, after these years, realized that until those cameras are rolling, it's not happening. And so I refuse now to get excited or to think about it. It's with my screen agent, and if someone wants to buy the rights to Hostage, then great.
Yeah, those are my exact words. Until the camera rolls, it ain't happening. And even when the camera does roll, it could be cancelled halfway through. So yeah, but as long as you get option money up front, that's
well,
great.
This is it. And I just try, I have lots of different projects on the go, and some come off and some don't. And I just always come back to the fact that I write books. That's what I do. I used to be a police officer. Now I write books, and that's my day job. And anything else is a nice sideline, and it's good for my skills, and it's good fun, and it means I work with interesting people, and it's extra money. But actually what I do is I write a book a year, and that's my job and how I pay the bills, and that's what I love to do. So yeah, Hollywood will have to wait.
Yeah, well, good for you. And you do write a book a year, and they're great. And I love this one, and so happy that it's finally here. Was it really a year ago already? That's a long time.
Yes, it was, because I read it.
Because
I read it a year ago when Claire and I did an event for her last book. What's it called?
After the End.
Right. And at the end of it, she asked me if I would read the manuscript for this one. And because it was going to go it was going to be a different kind of a book from what she'd been writing. And so I bet we read it about the same time. And I was very taken with it. One of the things I really like, Claire, and I wanted to ask you about it because, I don't know if you have any personal experience with either attachment disorder or panic attacks, but both of these feature very largely in this book. How did you go about making that so vivid, the attachment disorder that the adopted daughter has, or the panic attacks that Mina suffers from, fear of flying, so to speak, flying a plane, not being in a plane, but flying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate that I've never suffered from panic attacks. I think it's probably something that most of us can imagine. The adoption issue was something a bit different. I tell you what triggered it was a friend of mine who adopted a baby at around the age of 5 or 6 months, certainly well under a year, and then and this girl is now 8 or 9, and we were chatting, and she said, "Oh, I've had the most incredible day. Name of daughter, redacted, has just come to me for a hug. It's the first time she's instigated a hug." And I was absolutely speechless, because this, that she's been their daughter for 8 years. She doesn't know anything else. And so we talked about it, and my friend was really sort of comfortable sharing. And she said she's got an attachment disorder. Those formative months, those weeks really, of being so badly neglected and crying for someone that was never going to come, have taught this child that affection is something to be bartered, to be feared, to be very tightly controlled. And so it has taken her 8-9 years to offer herself up to her mum for a hug. And I just found it the most extraordinary thing. And I wondered how, and I don't have a child with attachment disorder. I do have a child with autism. And I was thinking about the two issues, and thinking about the strain that any kind of additional need places on each parent as an individual and their relationship with that child, but also what it does to you as a couple, because the way that you parent, even if you're parenting children without any additional needs, there are little flashpoints that you realize you're arguing with your partner, and actually you've got no kind of beef with each other. It's all because there's something has happened, with the dynamics with the children. So that was how Sophia was born, and I wanted to explore that. It was almost a kind of a selfish interest to explore in her character.
She's a wonderful character. I think her voice is very distinctive, and she's a difficult child, but you can see why Mina is so crazy about her, and why Adam has so much difficulty being a part of that relationship. So that's it's an important part of the book, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Didn't you find that to be true, that the development of the characters was just as gripping as the actual thriller?
I did, yeah. I thought, and that's what I look for is, obviously we need excitement, we need tension, suspense, great action, the trigger for the plot and all that stuff. But I like the real characters with a rich interior life. And, that just puts several more shades of depth into it that makes the book sustainable. With one-dimensional characters, that book would have worked fine as a thrill, for the afternoon on the beach, so you read it. But the more depth in it, the more it sticks with you. And that's what I remember having finished it, was, that's more, this is more than just an action thriller with a problem and a solution. This is a story about people that is not designed. It's because it's kind of easy to design a thriller character to support the plot of the action and for it to come out how you want. But if you have real characters, they tend not to do what you want. And so you have to figure that out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm often quite envious of people who write series, because you do all that work creating a character, and you live with them for many, many years in your case, and in lots of other people's cases. And so when you start a new book with that character at its heart, you don't have to do any of that. That they step onto that first page completely fully formed, don't they? Whereas with standalones, you've got to start from scratch and create that character, but you've also got to make sure that they make their kind of their emotional journey. They change during the course of the book, knowing that you're then just going to sort of throw them away and go on to the next. It's such a weird thing. I feel quite disloyal. I wouldn't want to write, there is no sequel to Hostage. It is a standalone book. And there's a reason why lots of film sequels don't work. And it's mostly down to the characters. They've done their job. So I wouldn't want to return to the characters, but I do often feel slightly exhausted that I'm just going to move on now and do it all again.
Yeah, I mean, that's true about series, except that there's always a new generation of readers who, book 25 in the series will be somebody's first book. And so you've got to have an element of introduction to it, such that it satisfies the new reader, but doesn't bore the old readers. So, but I think the crucial difference is what you just said. In a standalone like Hostage, it's got it from page 1 to the end. That is the only arc they're going to get. And you can afford to make that interesting. But for a series, I'm not a believer in character arc in series, because I think people come back to them for the familiarity and the comfort, and they actually don't want an arc. They want the guy to be the same every time. And so I fight against any kind of character development. But then that puts you into the category. The author himself is developing, getting older, getting different interests and so on. And so the character will always change, even though you try not to.
But Lee, you've done a brilliant thing in that you've created a continuing character who gets a standalone book with every single book. And, very few people have designed anything, although you and I have talked about whether you actually designed it or it just happened. But, it's really hard to do what you have done, which is.
I take Claire's point about being sad to see the characters go, because especially after the first book, I knew that Reacher would continue, but all the other characters were gone. And I actually nearly started crying because I had liked them so much. And they had been interesting and they'd been like friends, and I was never going to see them again. So
Killing Floor was a hard one to move on to the next book then.
It was, I had this cast of characters that I just loved and I'd spent 6 months with, and I didn't want to necessarily get rid of them, but I also did not want a soap opera where the same bunch of people show up every time.
So when we get to book 26 in October, if I remember right, October 25th, and now I can't remember the title. What is it?
Better Off Dead.
Better Off Dead, right. I'm going to come back and talk to you about that, because that's the first time in all the years I've known you have ever told me that you missed the characters in Killing Floor when they left.
Because I was so into it. Claire will remember the first book. You just live and breathe it. It is so important and vital. That when you finish it, it's a loss. It's like something has disappeared from you.
So that suggests that you don't feel like that as you become a more, I was going to say older, veteran writer. I'm on, what am I on? Book 5, which is a baby, obviously, compared to you. Am I going to care less as I go on? I feel like I'm caring more. I
would hope that you wouldn't care less, and I would hope that you care just the same. But familiarity, having done it over and over again, I think inevitably you understand from the beginning. Yeah, this is to get us through this book, and then we'll never see him again. I definitely did not have the same pangs of withdrawal as I did on the first one. It becomes clear in your mind, these people are a vehicle and let's have fun with them. And that's what I love more than anything else, especially the women characters that Reacher ends up hooking up with.
I can't. This is the full quote from this now. This is Lee Child likes to treat women like a vehicle he can move on from.
People, people say, why is the woman like this or like that? And I say, well, I'm sitting there for 6 months with a made-up character. Of course she's going to be interesting and cute and all that sort of stuff. Why would I sit there with a moron? I want a fun 6 months.
Well, if there's a character in Hostage I would like to see again, it would be Sophia. And that
Yeah.
is actually not impossible because she's such a young child. And the events in this book will have been so formative that she could be a really interesting character to go back to, at some point when she's a teenager or an adult.
Yes, no, that's true. And I think what I'm most likely to do with her is, a one-off fun extra, a deleted scene or a story set 10 years in the future, or I don't know. But yeah, I could do something with her maybe. I'm writing, so my next year book is what I think might be the start of a series, or could be the start of a series. So I'm kind of sort of sitting here mopping up Lee's advice and wondering, if you were going to start a new series now, what are the lessons that you'd learned that you would make sure you did in that first book?
Oh, I remember at the time pondering that too, hoping that this would be a series. And therefore I was instinctively kind of rationing it out and thinking, oh, okay, well, we could put that in book 2, or we could put that part in book 3. But then I thought, wait a minute, no, unless you give it 110% in book 1, then there won't be a book 2 or a book 3. So you can't afford to look ahead. You just got to pack it all in the first one and then start again for the second one.
And you didn't find that you sort of accidentally painted yourself into a corner with anything that you'd said in book 1?
Yeah, I mean, I remember arbitrary decisions like, because, when you're starting out, it's all rumor and myth and you've got no idea what's true or not. And I heard that the French market is very insular and doesn't accept imports very easily. So I randomly gave Reacher a French mother, thinking they'll definitely buy it now. And they did, but forever afterwards, Reacher's got this French mother. And, what do you do with that? And then I also, I screwed up the chronology of its promotions through the ranks in the army, that if you read the first, I think 8 or so books carefully, he graduated as a second lieutenant like everybody, then promoted lieutenant, promoted captain, promoted major, but then he's a captain again for some reason. And that was just a complete mistake on my part. But I eventually tied it together in a prequel showing him getting demoted. And so people no doubt think, my God, that guy planned 9 books ahead. That's amazing. But it wasn't. It was just a total mistake.
Okay, so I'm not going to try and overthink it then. I'm just going to take it.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I honestly feel overthinking is the death to any book. It's got to be spontaneous and vivid, and the more you think about it, the worse it gets. Well,
you see, but you and I come from polar opposite techniques. Where obviously your love of the blank page is infamous. You don't plot, you don't plan, you sit down, it happens. Whereas I plan everything, plan the whole thing, allow changes to creep in, and then I've got a rather messy first draft, and then I go and I rip it apart and I write it again and I build it better, and then I've got another draft. And so by the time I've got to 6-8 months, I've written it 3 times and I'm finally where I want to be, and I've got extra twists that have occurred to me along the way. Whereas yours is, I mean, you pretty much turn in a clean first draft, don't you?
I do, and I hate changing it. And, the editor will say, quite rightly, will say, wouldn't it be better if this happened after that? And I say, yeah, probably, but it didn't. As if this was real, as if this was what was really happening. So, I mean, our approaches are totally different. Do you think that's partly because you were a cop before and therefore so versed in organization, order, and so on? Or was it vice versa? Was that just your personality that made you become
I think I'm just a massive control freak, to be honest. I like to know what's happening. I like the order. I'm probably quite like Sophia. I like to things to be quite rigid. But also, I every time I write, I have this complete conviction that the better I plan, the more time I will save, and the less I will rewrite, because that's logical. That if I know where the twists are, and then I can do what I call seeding. I don't even know if it's a technical term, but if something's going to happen there, then I want to kind of seed 2 or 3 little mentions of it, or things that are going to pay off. Like setting up a joke and the punchline comes later. And I can't do that. I can't tell those jokes unless I know what the payoff is. So I think it's going to save me time. And then inevitably it doesn't, because I get to the end. And what generally happens is it's not that I realize I've done something wrong. It's that I realize I could do it better. And it's sort of annoying. Like right now, I'm between second and third draft. And actually it's fine. The book is kind of ready to go. But I know that there's something I could do, like a thread that I could pull and replace, that's going to make it so much better that I can't not do it, because I know now. And it's sort of irritating, but I think it's just my process.
Well, that sounds pretty good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if you can find a way that you're convinced it's going to improve it. But I hate pulling threads, because the thread on page 400 is the far end of it is on page 4, and so you've got an awful lot of things to think about there.
This is so funny. This is a conversation I had with John Sanford, because I'm lucky enough to read his books early, and he did one where he borrowed an Agatha Christie structure. I won't mention what it is because I'll give it away. But then he didn't really quite follow it. And I said to him, this book would be so much better if you went like this. He said, no, I'm done. I've done it. It's going to be this way. And and I understand that. He would have had to build in yet another crime in order to accomplish what I was talking about. And he was done with the book.
I love that bit. I love editing. Really, really love it. So I like the first draft. I like the freedom and the creativity, and I like to just be left alone to do it. And then the second draft I hate, because it's all a big mess and pulling things apart. But once I'm being edited, I just think it's a joy. I love to get someone a completely objective perspective to help me see something that I actually did know, but I couldn't quite put my finger on. And then I love making it sing. I think it's a really fun process. But what I want to know is, if you were writing now, if you wrote a book now anonymously and submitted it, do you think your style is so ingrained that an experienced editor might pick that up and say, this isn't, Jane Doe, this is Lee Child?
I don't know. It's a great question, that, really, because I feel like probably not, because I'm a really good parodist, not in a sort of cheap way, but I can I can be an actor and sort of adopt another writer's persona. Not a real person, but I could just invent a different type of writer and be that for one book. And the Reacher books.
That's why you went to the romantic place, isn't it? Yeah. You're actually writing dystopian, urban, romantic fiction.
Can't beat it, I'll tell you. But I feel like I could probably get away with it, and I bet nobody would know. Although I read so much, and I've been very sensitive over the years. You do know, actually, there's a guy at Harvard who runs a computer program. And I don't know if you remember a book called Primary Colors.
Yeah.
It was published, the author was anonymous, literally, Primary Colors by Anonymous. And it was about a fictionalized version of Bill Clinton's original 1992 campaign. And this guy at Harvard was developing this literary forensic thing, and he ran it through his program, and he figured out who it was simply by repeated favorite words or repeated favorite constructions. So I think it is very difficult to get away from that. And I can certainly sense that in other people. In fact, I sensed it on Primary Colors, and there was a clue in the first paragraph, a sort of little literary clue. The character's introducing himself, and he says, "I'm a small man," and there was no reason for that necessarily. But of course, German for small is Klein, and the author, in fact, was Joe Klein. And so I think that was a clue. And I also picked up on the Robert Galbraith book, the first Galbraith. I did not know it was J.K. Rowling, although it was clearly a person in love with words and language, which sort of narrowed it down towards her. But I knew it was a woman and not a man. Absolutely. Simply because, again, early in the book, she has the character in a pub, and he goes to the men's room for a pee and comments on the smell. Now, no man ever would even notice that. This was clearly a woman writer who stuck her head into the men's room for research and thought, oh my God, it stinks in here. And so that was a tell to me.
That's brilliant. And were you, when you found, so you read it obviously before, before it was published? Were you sent it?
I wasn't sent a copy of it, but I read it before it was outed.
Right.
Want to hear my story? My story is really a good one because I was sent a copy of it by Mulholland as an afterthought in the bottom of a box of ARCs. And I was leafing my way through and I needed a British crime book, and I read it and I really liked it, but I never could quite tell why. So I wrote, there was something about it. So I wrote to the editor of Mulholland, really nice guy named Josh, and I said, I like this book, and if I want to do well with it, I need to see if I can get the author to sign it. And he said, well, we don't know who the author is. And it was a submission from our British partner. And I said, well, if you can't do anything, you won't care if I talk to our partner in London and see if I can get them to get me some signed copies. He said, no, have at it. So I wrote to our partner in London and I said, yeah, I really like this book. And, is there any way to get any signed copies? And they said to me, well, we'll talk to the publisher. And they came back and they said, the author was so excited that you liked the book well enough to get it signed, that if you'll take 100 copies and we take 100 copies, the author will do it. And I said, great. Giving it no thought whatsoever. So the book came in and we sold our 100. Well, I wish we'd only sold like 40 and sat on the rest, but of course I wasn't that smart. But anyway, we had maybe 10 left and I didn't give it a lot more thought, except every once in a while I remembered how much I liked it and wondered how the author was. So imagine my surprise when it appeared that it was J.K. Rowling. And I wrote again and I said, what happened? And they said she really was so pleased that somebody liked her book without knowing who she was, that she was happy to come into the office and sign them. And every year I get one signed copy.
Awesome.
With a Galbraith. And yet, your point, Lee, is, there was just something about it where you knew that there was a story behind the book, but you couldn't put your finger on it. There was just something about the writing or whatever that made you feel like it wasn't anonymous, but you couldn't penetrate the curtain.
I think it must have felt so amazing for her, so liberating. And it's a
genuine thing, because there was nobody knew. So I think for her, it was a genuine enthusiasm that she was really embraced. I don't know her, so I've never been able to ask her that.
And presumably incredibly kind of validating that she's done it twice, because I think I was thinking about this the other day, not specifically in terms of J.K. Rowling, but about what happens the more books you have, the more success you have. Do you get edited in a different way? Do people become slightly nervous about giving you feedback? And I was thinking about it because I've got a maternity leave cover as an editor. So my editor that I've worked with from my first book is on maternity leave, and we have a great relationship, really, really honest. I know I can trust her to tell me if something's not working. And so I don't really need to think too much about it. But I've got a new editor who's great and brilliant, but I don't have that relationship. And so I found myself thinking, what if the book that I've turned in is really, really shit? And she just won't tell me because, we don't have that relationship, and she thinks I'm, at a particular level. Did you ever worry about that, Lee, or were you just confident in what you've written?
Yeah, I mean, I was always confident in what I'd written, and would be ready to argue with the editor at any time. But I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's completely backward in that you get an awful lot of attention at the beginning, and then if you're lucky enough to become a success, then they do become afraid and nervous and not at all willing to really, just take you to task. They absolutely do, and that's the time that you need it most.
Yes.
And we can absolutely see dozens and dozens of writers who you're never sure, are they declining simply because they're losing interest, or are they declining because the editors are not being as insistent as they should? And I've always said to my editors, just tell me right away. But inevitably, yeah, when you reach a level that it's an important release in that week of the year, for their bottom line and the retail bottom line and all of that. Once you get to become an institution, then yeah, they're very nervous about it. And I kept on telling them, I said, just tell me. And particularly my US editor, in the latter years, she would read it instantly and email me, fantastic, this is fantastic. And then I'd say, yeah, but tell me, what's wrong with it? Oh, no, it's brilliant, it's fantastic. And I'd say, tell me what you want me to do with it. Oh, no, it's brilliant, don't worry about it. And then 3 weeks later, she would say, well, there's this or that. And I said, you should have told me that at the beginning, we've just wasted 3 weeks. And I completely agree, yeah. And I think that it's about the relationship. And I've tried my best to have a really good relationship with editors, and I do, I love them. We get on really well. Absolutely no problem at all. But there is that thing about the institution that they back off the bigger the sales get, just at the time they should be paying even more attention.
Yeah, and I've been following something on Twitter over the last couple of weeks, a kind of gossip, I suppose, but a conversation about bullying authors, about so this was about an author in particular, but the conversation was sort of broadened out that there are authors who behave badly and are bullying junior members of staff, and I found it really extraordinary actually that someone in our position would feel that they have the right to treat someone badly who is publishing their book, and that those people feel they can't do anything about it because it's the star author and the bottom line's at stake.
I've heard of that in connection with a couple of notorious names. I've never actually seen it happen in front of me, but I've heard about it. Yeah, and it's ridiculous. It's just.
Well, I have seen it, and I can tell you that it is a hard thing to watch. But a watchword at the Poison Pen is that it's much easier to withstand failure than success. That success can do really bad things to people, and give them a sense of entitlement sometimes. That makes it difficult for other people. Also, really often successful people surround themselves with staff because they don't have time to deal with all of the daily responsibilities and so forth. And then the staff, they keep their jobs by creating distance. And so there's a bubble that can develop around very successful people, and that can be hard to do.
I can't even manage staff either, though. So
well, but I mean, one reason we're having this conversation, love, is that none of those things apply to you. I mean, I write to you and I say, why don't you come and talk to Claire? And you say, great. And that there's no bubble involved there. I want to ask you one thing before we switch to Patrick and questions. Lee, in all the reachers, you've always been very good about showing us how things work, whether he's hanging on, to a subway train or whatever he's doing. And in this book, Claire, you can't really write an airplane book without, talking about airplanes work. I mean, not just how they fly, not just the, the engine and the dynamics and all of that, but how they work inside, how they're laid out, how the crew moves around, where the, on a 20-hour flight from London to Sydney, which we didn't mention was the time span of this book, your ticking clock, so to speak, what happens to the crew? Do they take rest shifts? How do they deal with bad passengers? You obviously must have talked to some very experienced people to get the kind of information that you used to write us.
Yeah, I did. I mean, there are different elements to this. There's the kind of the nuts and bolts of the research. Like if I've got to write a scene in a flight deck, I kind of, I do need to know how a plane is flown. But of course, if you're writing from the perspective of someone who hasn't flown that plane before, then you can cheat a bit, because if they don't know, then you don't have to know either. And you get to explain things in very simplistic terms because you're channeling them. You're not writing as an expert. But I've got a few pilot friends and quite a few cabin crew friends. So lots of talking to them, lots of flying, lots of going to events around the world and observing, as we said earlier. And one of the great things about planes and cabin crew is that it's all there for you. There's nowhere to hide. You walk into their galley. They're making your drinks as you're queuing, waiting for the bathroom. There's nowhere for them to go, and you get those glimpses of conversations and of them being partially off duty. They're also famously indiscreet on the internet. It's extraordinary what they talk about on message boards that have no security whatsoever. The way they talk to passengers, the way they refer to them. And I mean, my first thrillers were pretty much all police based, and obviously I can write authentically about being in the police. But what I always find when I'm reading thrillers and crime novels is it's not the procedure that I'm worried about. If an author decides that a particular fingerprint process is going to be done, in a rather creative way, that's fine. I'm okay with that. What jolts me out of a story is the atmosphere. It's the way cops talk to each other. It's the kind of the everyday. It's the detail, and if that detail feels authentic, then the whole world feels authentic for me. And so that detail was found on internet forums and eavesdropping conversations. And I wanted to tell the story from the flight attendant's point of view. I didn't want the big hero who knows how to do his job. I wanted the woman out of her comfort zone, because actually they're the front line. They're there with the passengers all the time, and that felt like an interesting role.
Well, you did a wonderful job, even though I'd read it already and I knew how it came out. Since I just reread it to have this conversation, I found my heart pounding and I was almost like tearing up, So I think it certainly held up brilliantly. And my point was that even if you are telling it from the point of view of the person who doesn't know how to do it, you still had to have accuracy. Somebody had to be presenting information to her accurately enough for her to manage it. And you did.
And I did have a brilliant pilot actually who spent a lot of time with me and read through scenes, which is the only time I've ever done this. I've never sent parts of a book to someone to read through, because I think you're not a writer, and actually it can be quite dangerous as a writer giving your words to an expert, because they're good at their job, but you're good at your job. But I needed him to read it because I needed to make sure that I wasn't making any howlers. And I had made howlers, and there were really little things like, I had someone leaping up from the captain's seat, and actually you can't leap. The way the flight deck is shaped and the way the seats are shaped, and there's so little space, even on a great big plane, that you've got to ease out quite carefully. And that's the sort of detail that for someone who has been in a flight deck suddenly makes the whole thing feel inauthentic. So it was important to get those sorts of things right.
Well, you did a terrific job. Patrick, you want to unveil yourself and tell us if there are questions or comments?
Absolutely. What a great conversation, by the way. Hank Philippi Ryan, our good friend, I think all of our friend, is watching, and she makes a really interesting point. She says, the title does double and triple duty. She says hostage, not only to bad guys, but to jobs, to family, to spouses, to rules, to expectations. There's not really a question posed there, but she just makes that insight.
It's very, keenly observed. I'm awful at titles, like really, really bad at titles. I haven't come up with any of mine. Let Me Lie is the only title that was mine. Everything else has been a team effort or a suggestion from my editor. And for a while, the working title for Hostage was Hijack, which it was never going to be because it's, it just is, that is what it is. But we knew it needed to be something sort of urgent and immediate. But we wanted something that had the emotional resonance of my other books. I Let You Go, I See You. And what Hostage does is it has those echoes of being a hostage to fortune or a hostage to your emotions or your past. I like it, but I take no credit for it at all.
I was just thinking, Barbara, you might, or Lee, you might remember, there was a great airplane, I guess you could call it a thriller by, the author's last name was Iglesias, and it came out in the 90s. I think it was called Fearless, and they made a pretty interesting film about it. But it was a different tack. It was about two people who survived a plane crash. Very interesting premise, but more of a
You also sent me a note, Patrick, that we should not forget to mention Soul Plane with that master thespian Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, that's high culture for you. But also Airplane. I mean, what an absolute iconic comedy classic.
Oh,
yeah. It was my sister's favorite movie. She could never watch Airplane often enough. It was amazing.
Without quoting it, yeah.
That's got to be the most quoted movie. I mean, not a day goes by that we don't quote a line from it or something like that.
And also, Lee, I'm going to have to ask you about those guitars, but I'm staying away. I see the David Gilmour Strat there. Anyway, let's see. Debbie has some really good questions for Claire. She says, I'd like to know if Claire got nervous about flying after writing this thriller. I know it would scare me the next time I flew.
Well, the weird thing, of course, is that we've been in a pandemic, and I'm normally away for, I don't know, maybe a third of my year. And I've, like a lot of people, been at home now for 18 months. But so I haven't flown since I finished this book. But the last time I flew, I was writing a scene, a particularly tense scene from Hostage involving terrorism, and it's not a spoiler to say that there's some terrorism in it. That's kind of what happens when planes are hijacked. But I was traveling to the Emirates, and I always get a slightly irrational fear when I fly to the Emirates or when I'm in Dubai, because I'm convinced I'm going to accidentally break a law that I didn't know existed, and I'm going to end up in jail. And I was going to do a project in prison there, and so I had a kind of double layer of I mustn't do things wrong because I'm there as a sort of a with permission of the government. And I was sitting on the plane in business class, all very lovely, comfortable, and we hadn't taken off, and it was delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and I was writing, and I wrote about a bomb. And as I wrote about a bomb, they made an announcement and said, everyone off the plane, there's a security issue, we've all got to come off the plane. And I genuinely thought that they had hacked into my computer. I don't know why I thought they'd be interested in me, but I thought I had grounded the entire plane. Anyway, there'd just been some kind of some bomb scare, or anyway, nothing to do with me, but it did freak me out a bit.
I'll bet. Let's see. Okay. Also from Debbie, she says, Claire, do you make notes when you're traveling on snippets of things you overhear, or do you just rely on the memory?
Yeah, I'm a really bad author like that. I think we're all supposed to carry a notebook, aren't we? I mean, it's literally the piece of advice that I read everywhere, and I never carry a notebook, or sometimes I start a notebook and then I lose it, and I don't have a notebook with me, and I kind of work on the basis that if something is that good and is that memorable, then it's going to come out at the right time. Whereas if I kind of meticulously make notes and think, oh, I'll put that in that book, it all feels a bit forced. What do you do, Lee?
I'm the same as you. My rule is if you don't remember it, it wasn't worth remembering. But I love the eavesdropping thing. My best ever one was, I was doing a bookstore event where the audience was sitting and there was a curtain with a narrow passage for me to get to the front to go on the stage. And I was waiting behind this curtain. So I was literally next to the people in the audience, but they didn't know. And I heard these two women talking, and one of them said, oh, I had a hell of a day. I had to take my snake to the vet. And her friend said, why, what was wrong with it? And she said, well, it wouldn't eat. It hadn't eaten for several weeks, and it was getting longer and longer. And the friend said, well, what did the vet say? He said, well, the vet asked me a question. Does the snake sleep in your bed? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, yeah, he does. And the vet said, he was getting ready to eat you. And then I had to go on stage and do the event. This is the sort of reader I have.
That's extraordinary. I don't actually know if I'm more shocked that now I know that a snake might be getting ready to eat a human, or that a human wants to share their bed with a snake.
Well, me too, although I believe they're warm and they're soft and silky feeling. And I have no real sort of phobia about snakes, but yeah, it would be weird, yeah.
Wow.
You ever seen a full-grown rattlesnake in the wild?
No, I've heard them though, and quickly gone the other direction.
Yeah, I saw one in Tucson once going down a little arroyo, and it was, like thick as your arm, and it was just periscoping along. Really, I was like, oh God, very powerful. Let's see. To each author, is there anything you get scared by in life, or a subject in a thriller that would scare you? Do you have any primal fears?
For me, I mean, it's a very existential thing. I mean, my primal fear is the breakdown of society in terms of how we expect to relate to each other. I mean, back when Claire was a cop, for instance, if there was something had happened, and I would expect to go to the cop and have it listened to and maybe even sorted out. But if the cop was to say to me, no, that didn't happen. If there was another element of things not working like they should, that is fundamentally what scares me. No particular thing. I mean, air travel, I hope to die on a plane. That would be absolutely perfect. That you have a minute or so just to think it through, saying, yeah, okay, that was pretty good. I did this, I did that, and then bang, it's over. There wouldn't be a better way out, in my opinion.
Blimey, I mean, I was just going to say spiders, but now that we've had all that, do you know what? There's nothing that I wouldn't write about because I'm scared of it. There are things that I wouldn't write about because I don't want to live with that for a year. So I personally wouldn't write a book that was heavily focused on child abuse, because it's not really a world that I want to occupy. I don't want to be inside those people's heads. In terms of fears, I have a slightly odd and irrational fear of ending up in prison. And I don't know why. This kind of links to my going to Dubai story, I suppose. I don't know why I should fear that, because I don't tend to break the law. And, I've seen actually it's quite hard to get people convicted, even when they've done things wrong. But I do, I occasionally sort of break out in a cold sweat about the idea of being framed and ending up in prison for something I haven't done.
How about you, Barbara?
Well, I've just had the experience of reading 3 books in which dementia plays a very large role. One of them is your publisher's new book by Carolyn Cooney. And I guess that would be it. My greatest fear would be not physical deterioration, but if I were no longer me. I've actually appointed someone on the poison pen staff to tell me when I can't do this anymore. Because one of the hard things about dementia is that you don't recognize it.
Would you like Lee and I to also tell you if that ever happens? We'll have a secret sign. I don't know what it'll be yet, but we'll tip you the wink. I think what's interesting is that actually your fear and Lee's fear are the same, just in different ways.
Yeah.
So that kind of feeling that the world is not working the way it should. It's not just a kind of, oh, the world has gone wrong and it's a fantasy thing, but actually that must be how it feels, because if you've got a degenerative brain issue, you've got dementia or something similar, then suddenly the world is all upside down and the rules don't apply anymore. And I think it must be terrifying.
Well, my mother had dementia, and there's two phases. The initial phase is awful. Yeah, when they know they've got it. She was upset and embarrassed and so on. And then you move into the phase where you're just demented and you have no reference point. And she was gloriously happy. In her head, she reverted to being an unmarried 20-year-old who lived with her parents. And I wondered afterward, was that the happiest time in her life? Why did she go back there? But as soon as she didn't know she had dementia, she was fine. It's that initial period that when you're losing it, that must be horrible. Although maybe you're all being very polite and patient with me, and I've been like that for years.
Well, we didn't like to say. Have you read, so this is on my pile to read, and I've not started it yet, but and Lisa Geneva's non-fiction book, Remember, which is all about the power of the brain and memory, and how, what's a sign and what is just perfectly normal. It looks brilliant. I've pitched it very badly, but it's one, I think, Barbara, I think you'd enjoy it. It's one to look for.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind for sure. I don't get to everything I want to read any more than either of you do. It's hard.
Yeah, Walter Mosley wrote a really interesting book called The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray.
Right.
Which is, that similar premise.
Anything else there, Patrick?
Let's see. Not much. There was a comment just about how, flight attendants, any one of them must have fascinating stories to tell of what they've witnessed in their careers, but that's not really a question.
I wonder if airlines have NDAs. What an interesting idea.
Did you read that book, Air Babylon? That was allegedly a sort of tell-all by flight attendants. And there's another one called Hotel Babylon, that is the hotel trade.
Yeah.
They're fascinating inherently. The problem is you don't know whether they're true or not.
There's Coffee, Tea, and Me, an author I unmasked who turned out. Did you know that? He was the guy that wrote, I don't remember how many Jessica Fletchers, but he spent a whole career. I'm going blank on his name. I keep doing that.
Donald Bain.
Sorry?
Bain?
Yeah, Donald Bain.
Yeah.
But in any case, he wrote Coffee, Tea, or Me under a female pseudonym. And then he wrote, this is the part I love. Let's end on this. He wrote 6 more books under that same female pseudonym. And he dedicated every single one of them to Donald Bain himself. I figured it out. And I've always thought he wrote all the Margaret Truman books. And then he wrote Jessica Fletcher's Forever. And I've always thought how interesting, his authorial career must have been, always behind the mask, but always kind of giving you a little clue, who he might be. It was a wonderful moment when I said to a whole huge group of people when I was talking to him, and somebody asked him about the pseudonym, and it just came out of my mouth. I said, it happens all the time. For example, Margaret Truman never wrote any of her books. And I looked at him and he'd sort of turned white and his jaw dropped. And I said, oh my God, I said, was it you? And he said, you just blew my NDA completely apart. It was, but it started because the people who came to the event were wearing their old Pan Am stewardess uniforms. And, and obviously they knew that he had written Coffee, Tea, or Me. You can have a lot of fun doing this. It's amazing how much fun all of this stuff is. Anyway, Lee, thank you so much for being the surprise and giving up part of your afternoon to join us. And Patrick will now grill you on your guitars.
My pleasure. And best of luck with the book, Claire. And congratulations again, and have a lot of fun.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been really, really lovely to talk to you tonight.
And thank you, Claire, for letting us do the book launch for Hostage, this wonderful book. It goes on sale tomorrow. We have copies of The Poison Pen. And if you are in the UK, there are various good bookstores where you can buy the British edition. Anyway, it's been a joy to talk to both of you. Patrick, thanks as always for your help. Good afternoon, everyone, or good night, as we say.